Eleanor Thompson gazed out her kitchen window, watching the cardinal that visited her bird feeder each morning. At 70, with silver hair she still took pride in styling. Eleanor had developed routines that gave her days structure. 40 years working at the county clerk's office had ingrained in her a need for order, for predictability. The house was quiet, as it had been since her husband Richard passed away when their son Mark was only 8. The spacious 3-bedroom craftsman had once echoed with a child's laughter, with a husband's deep voice calling out, "I'm home." But for years now, it had been just Eleanor, moving between rooms that held memories like museum exhibits, preserved, untouched. The telephone rang, breaking her reverie. "Mom, it's me." Mark's voice had that excited quality she recognized from childhood, when he'd rush home to tell her about an A on a math test or making the baseball team. "Mark, how are you, honey?" Eleanor cradled the phone closer. "I'm great, Mom. Actually, I'm engaged," Rachel said yes. Eleanor felt her heart expand with joy. Mark and Rachel had been dating for just over a year, but she'd never seen her son so happy. "Oh, Mark, that's wonderful news." She clutched the counter for support, overcome with emotion. "I'm so happy for you both. Can we come over for dinner this weekend to celebrate? Of course I'll make your favorite pot roast." After hanging up, Eleanor moved through her house with a new energy. She'd been fond of Rachel Walker from their first meeting, a tall, confident woman with auburn hair and a career in marketing. Rachel had seemed a bit reserved around Eleanor, but she'd attributed that to nerves. Meeting your boyfriend's mother was never easy. That Saturday, Eleanor prepared a feast. She polished the silver flatware that had been her mother's, brought out the good china, and arranged fresh flowers in the center of the dining table. When the doorbell rang, she smoothed her dress and hurried to answer. Mark's face was luminous with happiness, his arm wrapped around Rachel's waist. At 32, he looked so much like his father it sometimes took Eleanor's breath away. "Mom, we have so much to tell you," Mark said, kissing her cheek. Rachel smiled, offering a brief hug. "The house looks lovely. Eleanor." Over dinner, they shared their plans for a June wedding, just 8 months away. "We're thinking about the Pacific Cliffs Villa," Rachel said, her eyes sparkling. "It has this amazing view of the ocean, and the gardens are perfect for photos." Eleanor knew the venue, exclusive, elegant, and extraordinarily expensive. "That sounds beautiful," she said carefully. "But isn't it rather costly?" A shadow flickered across Rachel's face. "Well, yes, but it's our special day." Mark jumped in. "Actually, Mom, we were hoping you might help a little with the wedding expenses. I know Dad left you well provided for, and this would mean so much to us." Eleanor looked at her son's hopeful face. Her savings had been earmarked for a comfortable retirement. But what was money for if not to make her only child happy? "Of course I'll help," she said. "I want you to have the wedding of your dreams." What Eleanor didn't anticipate was how a little help would expand into financing almost the entire wedding. The Pacific Cliffs Villa required a substantial deposit. The caterer Rachel selected was known for serving celebrities. The photographer had been featured in national magazines. Each time a new expense arose, Mark would call with that same hopeful tone. "Mom, would it be possible?" And each time, Eleanor would agree, dipping deeper into her savings. Meanwhile, the Sunday brunches that had been their tradition dwindled. First it was, "Rachel has plans with her mother." Then, "We need to look at potential venues." Until Eleanor found herself setting the table for one most weekends. When she did see them, she noticed subtle changes. Rachel controlled conversations, often interrupting when Eleanor spoke. Mark would glance at his fiancée before responding to his mother's questions. Small things, perhaps, but they accumulated like pebbles in Eleanor's shoe, tiny discomforts that grew more noticeable with time. 4 months before the wedding, Eleanor met Rachel's mother, Sophia Walker, at a dinner to discuss final arrangements. Sophia, impeccably dressed in designer clothes with too many diamonds on her fingers, assessed Eleanor with a calculating gaze. "I understand you're handling most of the expenses," Sophia said, swirling her wine. "How?" "Generous. Rachel deserves the best, of course." "I'm happy to help," Eleanor replied, though something in the other woman's tone made her uncomfortable. "It's wonderful you can afford it on a government salary," Sophia continued. "My late husband was in real estate development. Left us quite comfortable." Eleanor smiled tightly. "I've always been good with money." Later, as she overheard Sophia and Rachel discussing honeymoon destinations, "Darling, the Maldives are so much more exclusive than Hawaii." Eleanor felt a growing unease. There was something calculating in their conversation, something that made her feel like an outsider in the wedding she was funding. That night, Eleanor found herself examining her bank statements. Between the venue, catering, flowers, photography, and various deposits, she had already spent over $80,000, nearly a third of her retirement savings. The honeymoon to the Maldives would add another $15,000. "It's worth it," she told herself firmly. "Mark deserves happiness." But in the weeks that followed, Eleanor began to feel increasingly marginalized in the wedding preparations. Olivia Reed, the wedding planner, would call Rachel directly, even though Eleanor was paying her fee. Invitations were chosen without her input. The mother of the groom dress was selected by Rachel and Sophia during a shopping trip Eleanor hadn't been invited to join. "We thought you'd be busy," Rachel explained when Eleanor mentioned it. "Besides, you'll look lovely in navy blue. It's slimming." 2 weeks before the wedding, Eleanor received an invitation to the rehearsal dinner. Opening the envelope, she was surprised to find she'd been seated at a back table with distant relatives, not at the main table with Mark and Rachel. When she gently questioned this, Mark looked uncomfortable. "Rachel thought it would be better for us to sit with her parents in the wedding party," he explained. "You understand, right?" Mom, Eleanor did understand. She understood more than Mark realized. The Pacific Cliffs villa was even more spectacular than Eleanor had imagined. Perched on a bluff overlooking the ocean, its Mediterranean-inspired architecture glowed golden in the setting sun. Flowering vines cascaded down stone walls, and fairy lights twinkled in the garden trees. It was, as Rachel had declared, perfect. Eleanor arrived early for the rehearsal, dressed in a simple but elegant gray dress. She carried a small bouquet of roses from her garden as a gesture of goodwill for her future daughter-in-law. The villa buzzed with activity, waiters arranging champagne flutes, florists making last-minute adjustments, the photographer testing lighting angles. "Mrs. Thompson," Olivia approached with a professional smile. "Everything is coming together beautifully. The venue you chose is truly spectacular." "Thank you, Olivia. I just want Mark to be happy," Eleanor replied, glancing around. "Have they arrived yet?" "Rachel is in the bridal suite with her attendants. Mark should be here shortly." As more guests arrived, Eleanor found herself increasingly isolated. Rachel's family traveled in tight clusters. Her friends formed exclusive circles, and even Mark's friends, many of whom Eleanor had known since they were children, seemed distant, caught up in the excitement of the wedding party. Eleanor spotted Lily, Rachel's 6-year-old niece who would be serving as flower girl, hiding behind a column. The child looked overwhelmed, her eyes wide in her small face. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Eleanor approached with a gentle smile. Lily nodded shyly. "There's too many people." "I know just how you feel." Eleanor offered her a small cookie she'd kept in her purse. "Would you like this?" The child accepted it gratefully. "Thank you. Are you Mark's grandma?" Before Eleanor could respond, Rachel's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Lily, what are you doing over there? Come here right now." The little girl scurried away, leaving Eleanor alone by the column. She watched as Rachel embraced the child stiffly, whispering something in her ear while glancing back at Eleanor with poorly concealed irritation. The rehearsal proceeded with military precision under Rachel's direction. Mark fumbled his vows twice, earning a tight smile from his fiancée. "Let's try it again, honey," Rachel said, her tone making it clear that mistakes would not be tolerated tomorrow. Eleanor observed from the periphery, noting how Rachel's mother whispered to her friends while glancing in her direction. When they moved to the dining area for the rehearsal dinner, Eleanor found her seat at a table in the far corner, next to Mark's second cousins whom she barely knew. From this distance, she watched the main table, where Mark and Rachel sat surrounded by their wedding party and Rachel's parents. No one seemed to notice her absence there. As the meal progressed, Eleanor overheard snippets of conversation about the honeymoon plans. about a condo at the marina that Mark and Rachel had been looking at, about the future that stretched before them, a future that Eleanor had helped finance, but in which she seemed to have no place. After dessert, when guests had begun to mingle, Rachel approached Eleanor's table, champagne glass in hand. "Helen," Rachel's voice sounded sweet, but there was an edge underneath it. "Can we talk privately for a moment?" Eleanor followed her to a secluded terrace, away from the main party. The sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below provided a rhythmic backdrop to their conversation. "Tomorrow is going to be perfect," Rachel began, swirling the champagne in her glass. "The beginning of a new life for Mark and me. Yes, I'm very happy for both of you." Eleanor smiled, though something in Rachel's tone made her uneasy. "That's why I wanted to talk to you." Rachel paused, considering her words. "Mark and I have been discussing our future, where we want to live, what we need to be truly happy." Eleanor waited, a knot forming in her stomach. "We've seen this beautiful condo at the marina," Rachel continued. "Modern, ocean views, perfect for starting our family." She took a step closer. "But we need a substantial down payment." The knot in Eleanor's stomach tightened. "I've already contributed quite a lot to the wedding and honeymoon." "Your house," Rachel interrupted. "It's in a great location, completely paid off. $450,000, right?" Her smile widened. "We thought it would be the perfect wedding gift." Eleanor stared at her, struggling to comprehend what she was hearing. "My house? You're an older woman living alone in a house that's too big for you," Rachel said, her tone suddenly colder. "We're young. We're going to have children. It makes more sense. That house is all I have," Eleanor said quietly. "It's where Mark grew up. Where all my memories with Richard are." "Memories are in your heart, not in the walls," Rachel replied impatiently. "Besides, we'd help you find a small apartment closer to downtown, more convenient for a woman your age." Eleanor felt a coldness spreading through her chest. "I'm not giving you my house." "Rachel?" Rachel's smile vanished completely. "Excuse me. I said, I'm not giving you my house. It's my home." The silence that followed was thick with tension. In the distance, party laughter continued, oblivious to the confrontation unfolding on the terrace. "Eleanor," Rachel's voice trembled with barely contained rage. "I don't think you understand the situation. Kevin is your only son. We are his family now. I've helped with the wedding, the honeymoon. That's the least you can do," Rachel snapped, her voice rising. "Mark has taken care of you his whole life. He sacrificed opportunities for you. It's time you give something back." "Rachel, please lower your voice. Don't tell me what to do," Rachel hissed. "You're a selfish old woman who doesn't want to let go." Eleanor heard footsteps approaching. Several bridesmaids appeared on the terrace, drawn by the commotion. Among them was little Lily, who immediately hid behind one of the women. "Everything is fine," Eleanor said softly, trying to de-escalate the situation. "We were just talking." "It's not fine," Rachel shouted. "This woman refuses to help her own son." What happened next occurred so quickly that Eleanor barely had time to process it. Rachel's hand came up, and the slap echoed like a gunshot in the night. Eleanor's cheek burned, and the metallic taste of blood spread through her mouth where she'd bitten her tongue. Complete silence fell over the terrace. Eleanor saw Lily's terrified eyes before the child buried her face in the bridesmaid's dress. She saw Olivia appear in the doorway, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine shock. And then she saw Mark, her son, who came running at the sound of the commotion. He stopped, taking in the scene, his mother's reddened cheek, his fiancée's fury. For one moment, Eleanor waited for him to speak, to defend her, to express outrage at what had occurred. But Mark said nothing. He stood frozen, his eyes darting between Rachel and Eleanor, his mouth opening and closing without producing words. Eleanor touched her burning cheek. Everyone was watching her, waiting for screams or tears or drama. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, smoothed her dress, and looked Rachel directly in the eyes. "Good night," she said simply, and walked away. She moved slowly through the main hall where guests continued their celebrations, oblivious to what had transpired. She retrieved her purse, said polite goodbyes to those who approached her, and walked to the parking lot with measured steps. Only when she was inside her car with the doors locked did she allow her hands to tremble on the steering wheel. But she didn't cry. Not yet. Because Eleanor Thompson knew exactly what she needed to do next. The drive home felt surreal, like moving through a thick fog. Streetlights blurred past Eleanor's windshield, but her mind remained crystal clear, focused on the decisions that lay ahead. Her house greeted her in silence, familiar and comforting with the scent of the rosemary plants she tended on the kitchen windowsill. Eleanor moved through the rooms with purpose, switching on lights, grounding herself in the home she had created. 450,000. Rachel's voice echoed in her mind. The house where Mark had taken his first steps, where she had bandaged his scraped knees, where they had spent countless nights watching movies after Richard died. The house they now expected her to simply hand over as if it were a trinket. Eleanor went to her study and opened the top drawer of her desk. Inside lay a small blue notebook containing all the contact information for the wedding vendors. She had organized everything meticulously. The photographer's invoice, receipts for advance payments, contracts with their cancellation clauses highlighted. She picked up the phone and dialed the first number. It was 11:30 at night, but Olivia had included her personal number on her business card with a note available 24/7 for wedding emergencies. This certainly qualified. "Hello," Olivia's voice sounded alert despite the late hour. "Olivia, it's Eleanor Thompson. I apologize for calling so late." "Mrs. Thompson." There was a pause. "I saw what happened tonight. Are you all right?" The genuine concern in the younger woman's voice surprised Eleanor. In her 40 years at the clerk's office, she'd learned to distinguish between professional courtesy and real interest. This was the latter. "I'm fine, Olivia. But I need to talk to you about tomorrow." "Of course. What can I do for you?" "I need to cancel everything." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. When Olivia spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. "Everything, Mrs. Thompson. Everything that's in my name. The villa, the catering, the flowers, the photographer, the music. Everything I hired and paid for. Mrs. Thompson, I understand you're upset, but the wedding is tomorrow. The guests are already in town." "Olivia," Eleanor interrupted gently, "did you read the cancellation clauses in our contracts?" Another pause. Eleanor could hear papers rustling. "Yes, I'm familiar with them. You have the right to cancel up to 12 hours before the event with forfeit of deposits. So I'm within my rights. Technically, yes. But there are no buts. Olivia, I want you to cancel everything tonight." Eleanor waited, listening to Olivia's measured breathing through the phone. She knew the wedding planner was calculating, weighing professional implications against what she had witnessed on the terrace. "May I ask why?" Olivia finally asked. "Because I refuse to pay for a wedding where the bride physically assaults me and my son says nothing to defend me." The words came out stronger than Eleanor had intended, but it was the simple truth. "I understand," Olivia said after a moment. "The groom, does Mark know about this decision?" "Mark will have to learn to make his own decisions and face the consequences. It's about time." "All right, Mrs. Thompson, but some vendors will give us trouble for the last-minute cancellation, and some deposits are non-refundable. Whatever deposits are lost. It's a price I'm willing to pay. I'll start making calls immediately. The villa, the caterer, the florist, the photographer, the band. Were the fireworks included too?" "Yes, the midnight fireworks display. Cancel that as well." "Consider it done. Mrs. Thompson," Olivia hesitated. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing." After hanging up, Eleanor made herself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in her living room, one by one. She called the vendors Olivia couldn't handle personally, the transportation service for guests, the hotel where she had arranged special welcome baskets, the bakery that was creating the wedding cake. Each call followed a similar pattern: surprise, protest, and finally reluctant acceptance when Eleanor mentioned cancellation fees and contract terms. By 1:30 a.m., it was done. The wedding that had consumed her savings and her energy for months had been dismantled in a matter of hours. Eleanor felt strangely calm. It was as if she had been holding her breath for months, perhaps years, and could finally exhale. At 2:15 a.m., her phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, what have you done?" His voice sounded desperate, frantic. In the background, Eleanor could hear Rachel screaming something unintelligible. "Hello, Mark. How are you?" Eleanor's voice remained steady. "How am I, Mom? Olivia just called us. She says you've canceled everything. The wedding is tomorrow." "That's correct. I've canceled my payments." "You can't do that. There are 150 guests coming." "They can go home. They'll have a free Saturday." "Mom, this is insane. You can't cancel your own son's wedding." "I'm not canceling your wedding. Mark, I'm canceling my financial support of it." "There's a difference." "It's the same thing. Everything is already set up. Everyone will show up expecting a celebration." "Then perhaps you should have thought about that before you let your fiancé hit me." Silence. A long, tense pause. "Mom," Mark's voice softened. Rachel was upset about the wedding. She wasn't herself. "Really, Mark, that's your defense." "I'm not defending what she did, but you did nothing to stop it. You just stood there while she humiliated me in front of all those people." "I didn't know what to do." "It all happened so fast." "You knew exactly what to do. Mark, you just chose not to do it." Eleanor heard Rachel's voice growing louder in the background, demanding to speak with her. Mark's attempts to calm her seemed ineffectual. "Mom, please, we can fix this. Rachel is willing to apologize." "Oh, really? And are you—" "Me. Why do I need to apologize? For not defending me. For letting her treat me that way." "Mom, it's not that simple." "Yes, Mark, it is that simple." Rachel managed to grab the phone. Her voice came through, shrill and hysterical. "Eleanor, you can't do this. It's my wedding, my special day. Your special day ended when you struck me." "It was a mistake. I was nervous. I apologize." "Too late, Rachel. You're a bitter old woman. You've always been jealous of us." "Goodbye, Rachel." Eleanor hung up and unplugged the phone from the wall. She didn't want any more calls tonight. She stayed awake until dawn, not because sleep eluded her, but because she didn't want to miss this feeling of clarity. It was as if a fog that had surrounded her for years, perhaps since Richard's death, perhaps longer, had finally lifted. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through her kitchen window, Eleanor made coffee and sat at her small breakfast table. Her cheek still ached slightly from the slap, but the physical pain was insignificant compared to the sense of liberation she felt. For the first time in decades, Eleanor had made a decision solely for herself, not for Mark's benefit, not to keep peace in the family, but because it was what she deserved. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The landline began ringing at 7 a.m. Eleanor had plugged it back in, knowing Olivia might need to confirm cancellation details. But it wasn't Olivia. It was Sophia Walker. "Eleanor, it's Sophia, Rachel's mother." "Good morning, Sophia." "Eleanor, please, you must reconsider. The kids are devastated." "The kids are 32 years old. Sophia, they're adults." "Yes, but you know how weddings are. Everyone's nervous. Things get said that aren't really meant. Do you think Rachel didn't mean to slap me?" "Well, She was very upset." "Sophia, with all due respect, your daughter asked me to give her my house. When I refused, she hit me, and my son did nothing to stop her. What would you have done in my place?" Sophia had no answer. "Look, Eleanor, I understand you're upset, but you can't ruin my daughter's life over one moment of—" "I'm not ruining anyone's life. I'm simply refusing to pay for my own humiliation." After ending the call with Sophia, Eleanor decided to take a walk. She needed fresh air and space to think. She put on comfortable shoes and headed to Westwood Park, where she often walked on Sunday mornings. The city was just waking up. Bakers had their shops open, the smell of fresh bread mingling with the salty air from the nearby ocean. Eleanor walked past the bench where she sometimes sat to read, past the newsstand where she bought crossword puzzle magazines, past the cafe where she occasionally treated herself to breakfast. Everything seemed more vivid this morning, as if she had been seeing the world through a fogged window that someone had finally wiped clean. In the park, she encountered Margaret, a neighbor who also enjoyed early morning walks. "Eleanor, how are you?" Margaret called out. "Isn't today Mark's wedding? Good morning, Margaret. It was supposed to be. Did something happen?" Let's just say plans have changed. They walked together for a while, discussing the neighborhood, the weather, simple things that had nothing to do with canceled weddings or broken relationships. Eleanor found comfort in this normality, this reminder that life continued regardless of personal dramas. When she returned home, Mark's car was parked on her street. He sat on her front steps, head in his hands. He wore the suit he had bought for the wedding, but his tie was loosened and his hair disheveled. "Hello, Mark," Eleanor said, stopping in front of him. He looked up. His eyes were red, as if he'd been crying. "Mom, please, you have to help us. Where's Rachel?" "At the hotel with her parents. She hasn't stopped crying all night." Mark ran his hands through his hair. "The guests are calling. Some have already left town. Others are demanding explanations. It's a disaster." "Mom." Eleanor sat down next to him on the steps. For a moment, he was again the little boy she had comforted after nightmares. "Mark, do you understand why I did this? Because Rachel hit you. I know it was wrong. Not just because she hit me. Do you know what she asked me before that happened?" Mark shook his head. "She asked me to give her my house. This house where you grew up. She told me I was too old to need it." His eyes widened in genuine surprise. "She asked you for your house. $450,000 mark. That's what this house is worth, according to your fiancé. And according to her, I should give it to you as a wedding gift." "Mom, I didn't know anything about that. I swear. You didn't know she planned to ask me last night. But you knew she wanted the house. Didn't you?" Mark's expression changed. He did know. "Well, yes. We've seen some condos at the marina, but I never thought she'd actually ask you for your house. That was Rachel's idea." "And when she told you about her plan, what did you say to her?" Mark was silent. "What did you say?" "Mark, I told her. I told her you would never agree to something like that." "But you didn't tell her it was wrong to ask, did you? You didn't tell her it was inappropriate. You didn't tell her that this house means more to me than its market value." "Mom, things aren't that simple." "Yes, Mark, they are that simple." Eleanor stood up and took out her house keys. "I have things to do now. Can I come in with you?" Eleanor looked at her son for a long moment, this grown man with his rumpled suit and pleading eyes, waiting for her to solve his problems as she always had. "Not today. Mark." She entered her house and closed the door firmly behind her. Through the kitchen window, she watched as Mark remained on the steps for several minutes, staring at his phone, likely deciding who to call next. Finally, he straightened his shoulders, adjusted his tie, and left. That afternoon, Olivia called to confirm all cancellations had been completed. Some vendors had protested, but she had managed the situation with professional efficiency. "How are the bride and groom taking it?" Eleanor asked. "Honestly, Mrs. Thompson, I don't think they've realized the full extent yet. They're trying to find a last-minute venue, but on a Saturday in June." Olivia trailed off. "I understand. Thank you for handling everything. Olivia, if I may say so, Mrs. Thompson, you did the right thing. In my 15 years of planning weddings, I've never seen a mother-in-law treated that way." "What will you do now?" Olivia asked. It was a good question. Eleanor looked around her kitchen with its walls covered in Mark's photos, its cabinets stocked with his favorite foods, the special mug she kept for his visits still in the dish rack. "Now," she said with newfound certainty, "I'm going to live my life." That evening, for the first time in months, Eleanor had a peaceful dinner alone. She made herself an omelet with fresh herbs from her garden, poured a glass of the Cabernet Sauvignon she'd been saving for a special occasion, and put on an old jazz record that reminded her of dancing with Richard in their living room when Mark was a baby. The ringing of the doorbell interrupted her reverie. Through the peephole, she saw Mark standing on her porch, shoulders slumped in exhaustion. Eleanor took a deep breath before opening the door. "Can I come in, Mom?" His voice was hoarse, his eyes bloodshot. Eleanor stepped aside, allowing him to enter. In the living room, Mark collapsed onto the sofa, loosening his tie further. "I've been fielding calls all day," he said, rubbing his face. "Relatives demanding explanation, friends asking if we're still together, the hotel threatening to charge us for the rooms we reserved for out-of-town guests." Eleanor sat in her armchair, hands folded in her lap. "I'm sorry it's been difficult for you." "Difficult?" Mark looked up, incredulous. "It's been a nightmare. Rachel's family is furious. Her mother is telling everyone you had a mental breakdown. The caterer is threatening to sue someone, probably me, since you canceled within the contract terms. I did warn you there would be consequences." "Mom," Mark leaned forward, his voice softening. "I know Rachel was out of line last night, but couldn't you have waited until after the wedding to sort this out? Did you have to embarrass us in front of everyone we know?" Eleanor felt a flash of anger. "Did Rachel have to hit me in front of everyone? Did you have to stand by and do nothing?" Mark had the grace to look ashamed. "I froze. I didn't know how to react. A son defends his mother. Mark, that's how you react. It all happened so fast. One minute you were talking, the next, I was in shock. And yet, instead of coming to check on me afterward, you stayed with Rachel. Instead of calling me later to apologize, you only called when you realized I had canceled everything." Mark stared at the floor. "I had to calm Rachel down. She was hysterical." "Of course she was. Her plan to get my house had backfired spectacularly." "Mom, about the house. Let's be very clear about this. Mark, did you know Rachel intended to ask me for my house?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Not exactly. I mean, we had talked about it in general terms." "What general terms?" "That eventually, when you were older, the house would probably be mine anyway, and we might sell it to buy something we really wanted." Eleanor felt as if she'd been slapped again. "When I'm older, I'm 70. Mark, how much older do I need to be before you decide my home should be yours?" "That's not what I meant." "What did you mean?" Then Mark ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd made since childhood when cornered. "I just meant, someday, after you know, after I die?" "You mean, Mom, please, I would never—" "But Rachel didn't want to wait, did she? She wanted the house now, while I'm very much alive and in good health. Rachel can be impulsive. She doesn't always think things through. And violent, apparently." Mark winced. "That was a one-time thing. She's never done anything like that before." "How comforting." Eleanor's tone was dry. "Does that mean I should expect to be hit only on special occasions, holidays, birthdays?" "Mom, that's not fair. She's really sorry." "Is she? Because she seemed more angry than sorry when she called me a bitter old woman last night." Mark had no response to that. They sat in uncomfortable silence, the jazz record having ended, the needle scratching softly against the label. Finally, Mark spoke. "What happens now? That depends on you and Rachel. Will you ever forgive us?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I can forgive, Mark, but I won't forget, and I won't pretend it didn't happen. If we're to have any relationship moving forward, it has to be based on mutual respect." "Of course I respect you. Mom, do you seem to think my house should automatically be yours. You stood by while your fiancé physically assaulted me. Those aren't the actions of someone who respects me." Mark looked genuinely confused. "But you're my mother. Everything you have will be mine someday. That's just normal?" The casual entitlement in his statement stunned Eleanor. Had she raised him to think this way? Had she been so focused on giving him everything that he now expected everything as his due? "No, Mark, what I have is mine to do with as I choose. I might leave it to you. I might donate it to charity. I might spend every last penny on cruises around the world. The point is, it's my decision." "But family respects each other's autonomy," Eleanor interrupted. "Family doesn't make demands or issue ultimatums. Family certainly doesn't resort to violence when they don't get their way." Mark stood up abruptly. I should go. Rachel is waiting at her parents' house. We need to figure out what to tell people. Tell them the truth, Eleanor suggested. That might be a good place to start. As she watched Mark drive away, Eleanor felt a mixture of sadness and determination. The conversation had revealed how deep the problem ran, not just Rachel's behavior, but Mark's fundamental assumptions about their relationship and his entitlement to her assets. For perhaps the first time, Eleanor saw her son clearly, not as the little boy she had protected and provided for, but as the man he had become, a man who expected the world to accommodate him, who believed his mother's resources were ultimately his to claim. It was time for both of them to learn a difficult lesson. The following morning, Eleanor called William Bennett, a retired attorney who had been her late husband's colleague at City Hall. They arranged to meet that afternoon to discuss her will and other legal matters. Before the meeting, Eleanor visited the community center where she had occasionally taken art classes before the wedding planning consumed her time. The summer term was just beginning, and she signed up for the intermediate painting class that met every Tuesday and Thursday. Eleanor, it's wonderful to see you back, said Caroline Davis, the instructor, a tall woman with silver-streaked dark hair and paint-stained hands. We missed you in the spring session. I've been busy with my son's wedding, Eleanor replied, then added, though that's no longer happening. Caroline raised an eyebrow, but didn't pry. Well, I'm glad you're back. Art has a way of helping us through life's complications. That simple exchange, warm but respectful of boundaries, made Eleanor realize how much she had missed having friends who were not connected to her role as Mark's mother. At 3 o'clock, William arrived at Eleanor's house carrying a worn leather briefcase. He was in his mid-70s, with a full head of white hair and alert blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. It's been too long, Eleanor, he said as they settled in her living room. How have you been? That's a complicated question. William. She told him everything, the wedding planning, Rachel's demand for the house, the slap, Mark's inaction, and the canceled wedding. William listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a small pad. When she finished, he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. I'm sorry you've experienced this. Eleanor. Truly. Thank you. William. Now I need your help to make some changes to my legal affairs. What sort of changes? First, I want to amend my will. Currently, Mark is my sole heir. And you want to disinherit him? Eleanor considered carefully. Not completely, but I want him to understand that his actions have consequences. William nodded. In this state, you have the legal right to distribute your assets as you see fit. Though children do have some statutory protections against complete disinheritance without cause. However, what you've described, allowing your physical assault without intervention, could certainly constitute cause. I don't want to disinherit him entirely. I'm thinking more of conditions. What sort of conditions? I want Mark to publicly apologize for his behavior. I want Rachel to do the same. And I want them both to attend family therapy for at least a year before they can access any inheritance. William raised his eyebrows. That's quite specific. I'm also considering setting up a foundation to help older women facing family conflicts or financial exploitation. And if Mark doesn't meet these conditions, then his portion of the inheritance would go to the foundation instead. William made more notes. I'll draft several versions of the will for you to review. What about your house? Do you plan to stay here? Eleanor looked around the living room, at the familiar furniture, the photos on the walls, the memories embedded in every corner. For the first time, she wondered if this house, which had been her anchor for decades, might also be holding her back. I'm not sure, she admitted. I've never considered living anywhere else. Well, property values in this neighborhood have increased significantly. If you were to sell, you could purchase something smaller and still have substantial funds for your foundation or other pursuits. The idea took root in Eleanor's mind. A fresh start. A new space that wasn't saturated with memories of Mark's childhood, of Richard, of the life she had lived as someone's wife and someone's mother, but not fully as herself. When William left, promising to return with the legal documents in a few days, Eleanor wandered through her house with new eyes. The spare bedroom that had been Mark's was still decorated with his high school pennants and sports trophies. The kitchen cabinets held dishes she'd selected because Richard had liked the pattern. The backyard garden was designed for a family that no longer existed. This had been the perfect house for the Eleanor of the past. But who was she now? And what kind of space would that woman want to inhabit? The first painting class was intimidating. Eleanor hadn't held a brush in years, and her initial attempts at the still life arrangement, a blue pottery vase with sunflowers, were awkward and stiff. "Relax your wrist," Caroline suggested, demonstrating with her own brush. "And remember, we're not trying to photograph the flowers. We're trying to express how they make us feel." By the end of the 2-hour session, Eleanor had produced a painting that bore only a passing resemblance to the vase of sunflowers. But she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: creative satisfaction. The act of mixing colors, of making marks on canvas that came from within her rather than responding to external demands, awakened something dormant. "Not bad for a first attempt after a long break," Caroline said as they cleaned brushes afterward. "Will you come to the coffee meetup after next week's class? Several of us go to Riverside Cafe. It's become a bit of a tradition." Eleanor hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that." The routine of twice-weekly classes and Thursday coffee meetups quickly became the highlight of Eleanor's week. The painting group consisted mostly of women her age or slightly younger, many of them navigating similar life transitions: retirement, widowhood, adult children with complicated lives of their own. "My daughter thinks I should move closer to her family in Phoenix," said Gloria, a retired nurse, during one coffee session. "She means well, but I've lived in this town for 40 years. All my friends are here. My son expected me to be a full-time babysitter when he had kids," added Patricia, stirring her latte. "When I explained I had my own activities, you'd think I'd committed a crime." Eleanor listened to these stories with growing recognition. Her situation with Mark wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern many women her age experienced, a presumption that their time, resources, and even their homes were community property, available to adult children by virtue of relation. 3 weeks after her first painting class, William returned with the revised will and other legal documents. "I've prepared 3 versions," he explained, spreading papers across her dining table. "The first reduces Mark's inheritance to the minimum statutory share and designates the rest to charities of your choosing. The second disinherits him completely for family mistreatment. The third is the conditional version we discussed. Mark inherits half, but only if he meets the specified requirements." Eleanor reviewed each document carefully. "I prefer the third option. I don't want to punish Mark permanently. I want him to understand that respect is a prerequisite for family relationships." William nodded. "I've also prepared a revocation of power of attorney, just to be safe. Have you ever given Mark legal authority to act on your behalf?" "No, never." "Good, but it's better to be explicit. And this document specifies that any future gifts or financial assistance to Mark must be notarized with independent witnesses present." "Is that really necessary?" "William?" He looked at her seriously over his glasses. "Eleanor, in my 40 years as an attorney, I've seen families torn apart over money. I've seen children manipulate elderly parents, pressure them, even threaten them. I'm not saying Mark would go to those extremes, but given recent events..." Eleanor understood. "You're right. Better to be protected." The final document was a letter addressed to Mark, explaining the reasons for these changes. It wasn't angry or accusatory, but it was clear his behavior and his tacit support of Rachel's actions had broken her trust, and trust, once broken, had to be earned back. As William prepared to leave, he asked, "Have you given any more thought to selling the house?" "I have," Eleanor admitted. "In fact, I've been looking at condominiums near the ocean." "That's a significant change." "I think I'm ready for significant changes." After William left, Eleanor sat in her garden, watching the late afternoon sunlight filter through the oak tree Richard had planted when they first bought the house. She felt lighter somehow, as if the legal documents had not only protected her assets, but had also freed something within her, the permission to prioritize her own wants and needs after decades of putting others first. The doorbell rang that evening as Eleanor was preparing a simple dinner. Mark stood on the porch, holding a manila envelope. his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. "What is this?" he demanded, waving the envelope William had sent by courier. "It's exactly what it says it is," Eleanor replied calmly. "A revision of my will and other legal documents. You're disinheriting me, your own son. If you had read it carefully, Mark, you'd know that's not accurate. I've established conditions for your inheritance. You can meet them or not. That's your choice." Mark pushed past her into the house. His face flushed. "Family therapy. Public apologies. This is humiliating. More humiliating than allowing your fiancé to slap me in public." Mark paced the living room, the documents clutched in his hand. "I can't believe you're doing this. All because of one mistake." "It wasn't one mistake, Mark. It was a revelation of how you truly see me. Not as a person with rights and feelings, but as a resource to be used. A placeholder in your life." "That's not true. I love you. You're my mother. I don't doubt you love me in your way. But you don't respect me. There's a difference." Mark collapsed onto the sofa, the anger seeming to drain from him. "What do you want from me? Mom, I want you to see me, really see me, as Eleanor Thompson, not just as Mom. I want you to understand that my life and my possessions belong to me, not to you, not to Rachel. I want you to recognize that allowing someone to mistreat me is its own form of mistreatment." Mark stared at the documents in his hands. "And if I meet these conditions, the therapy, the apologies, then you'll receive half of my estate when I die. The other half will go to the foundation I'm establishing." "Foundation? What foundation?" Eleanor explained her idea to create an organization that would help older women facing family conflicts, financial pressures, or exploitation. Mark looked bewildered. "Where did this come from? You've never mentioned wanting to start a foundation before." "There are many things I've never mentioned, Mark. Many aspects of myself I've set aside to be your mother. I'm reclaiming them now." "And the house? Are you really going to sell it?" "Yes. I've already spoken with a real estate agent. The first showing is next week." Mark looked around the living room, his expression suddenly vulnerable. "But this is home. All my memories are here." "Your memories go with you, Mark. They aren't contained in the walls." After Mark left, Eleanor felt exhausted but resolute. Standing up to her son was more difficult than standing up to Rachel had been. With Rachel, the lines were clear. With Mark, each confrontation was tangled with a lifetime of love, of memories, of the fierce protective instinct that had defined her life as a mother. Yet Eleanor knew it was necessary, not just for her own dignity, but for Mark's growth as well. She had protected him too much, given too freely without expecting respect in return. The result was a man who believed he was entitled to everything she had, who could stand by while she was assaulted and still expect her support. Love without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was enabling. And Eleanor was done being an enabler. The condominium Eleanor chose was in a modern building 2 blocks from the beach, with floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the space with light and offered glimpses of the Pacific from the small balcony. At half the size of her house, it required her to make decisions about which possessions truly mattered to her. The process of sorting through decades of accumulated belongings was both painful and liberating. Each item had to pass a simple test. Did it bring her joy in the present, or did it merely anchor her to the past? Richard's favorite chair, worn but comfortable, made the cut. The formal dining set they had used twice a year for holidays did not. Mark's childhood drawings were photographed and stored digitally, with only a select few framed for display. The garden tools were given to a neighbor who had always admired Eleanor's roses. The real estate agent had been right. The market was exceptionally strong. Eleanor's house sold within a week for $485,000, well above the $450,000 Rachel had cited. "The neighborhood has become very desirable," the agent explained. "Young families are willing to pay a premium for the school district." After purchasing the condominium for $295,000 and setting aside funds for furnishing it, Eleanor was left with a substantial sum to establish the foundation she had envisioned. William helped her navigate the legal requirements for creating a nonprofit organization, and Caroline introduced her to Deborah Winters, a retired social worker who became the first member of the foundation's board. I've seen so many women your age being pressured by family, Deborah told Eleanor over coffee. They're made to feel selfish for maintaining boundaries, for wanting to enjoy the resources they've spent a lifetime accumulating. Exactly, Eleanor agreed. There's this unspoken expectation that once we reach a certain age, our needs become secondary to everyone else's. Together, they began outlining the services the Dignity Foundation would provide legal advice for women updating their wills or facing family pressure, support groups for discussing boundary issues, educational workshops on financial independence, and in some cases, emergency grants for women needing to establish separate households from controlling family members. As the foundation took shape, Eleanor's new life did as well. She arranged her condominium with careful intention, the living room oriented toward the view rather than a television. A corner of the main room transformed into a painting studio with perfect natural light, the small second bedroom set up as a home office for foundation work. Mark visited 3 weeks after she had moved in. He stood awkwardly in the center of the living room, taking in the space that was so different from the house he had grown up in. "It's nice," he said finally. "Smaller than I expected." "It's exactly what I need," Eleanor replied, offering him tea on the balcony where containers of herbs and flowers created a miniature garden. "How's Rachel?" she asked as they settled into the chairs overlooking the street below. Mark hesitated. "We're taking some time apart. She's staying with her parents while we figure things out." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you—" His tone was skeptical. "I'm sorry you're going through a difficult time. That doesn't mean I've changed my mind about her behavior." Mark nodded, seemingly accepting this. "I've started seeing someone. A therapist. This surprised Eleanor." "That's good. Mark." "Rachel, too. Her therapist specializes in anger management and control issues." He stared into his tea. "Mine is helping me understand why I didn't stand up for you. And why didn't you—" Mark's hands tightened around his cup. "It's complicated. He says I have conflict avoidance stemming from Dad's death, that I'm so afraid of losing people I care about that I'll do anything to avoid confrontation, even when it means letting someone I love be hurt." It was the most insightful thing Eleanor had heard her son say about himself. "That makes a certain sense. He also says Mark hesitated, "that I've never really seen you as separate from your role as my mother, that I've taken you for granted. And what do you think about that?" "I think he's right." Mark looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "I've never asked about your dreams, Mom, about what you want from life beyond taking care of me. I've just assumed you'd always be there, always put me first." Eleanor felt a surge of hope at these words. "I'm glad you're gaining these insights. Mark, are you still going through with the foundation?" "Yes, we're filing the paperwork next week." Mark nodded slowly. "And the conditions in the will still stand." "They do." "Not as punishment, Mark, but because I believe they represent the kind of relationship we should have, one based on mutual respect and recognition of boundaries." As Mark prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "You know what's strange? Mom, for the first time, I feel like I'm getting to know you, not just as my mother, but as Eleanor Thompson, and I like her." After he left, Eleanor sat on her balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Mark's words had touched her deeply. Perhaps, just perhaps, something positive was emerging from the painful rupture of the canceled wedding. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Caroline, calling to confirm their painting group's weekend excursion to sketch at the beach. "We're meeting at 10 a.m. by the pier," she said. "Deborah is bringing her famous cranberry scones." "I'll be there," Eleanor replied, smiling as she hung up. Looking out at the darkening sky, Eleanor felt a sense of anticipation she hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow would bring new people, new conversations, new opportunities to express herself through art. The future stretched before her, not as a diminishment, but as an expansion. For the first time in decades, Eleanor Thompson was not defined primarily as someone's wife or someone's mother. She was, simply and powerfully, herself. The autumn morning was crisp, as Eleanor walked along the waterfront to the small office space the Dignity Foundation had leased in downtown Seacliff, located on the second floor of a restored Victorian building with windows overlooking the harbor. It was modest but welcoming, exactly the atmosphere Eleanor had envisioned. Inside, Deborah Winters was already arranging chairs for their first official board meeting. At 68, the former social worker brought decades of experience working with vulnerable populations, along with an infectious energy that balanced Eleanor's more measured approach. "The coffee's brewing," Deborah called out as Eleanor entered, "and I've set up the projector for your presentation." Over the past 2 months, what had begun as a vague concept had evolved into a structured organization with a clear mission to provide support, resources, and advocacy for women over 60 facing family conflicts, financial pressures, or exploitation. With Williams' legal guidance, they had secured 501c3 status, established a board of directors consisting of 5 women with complementary skills, and developed a strategic plan for their first year of operation. By 10 o'clock, the other board members had arrived: Caroline from the art class, who would head their community outreach, Patricia Martinez, a retired financial advisor who would oversee their emergency grant program, and Dr. Linda Chen, a geriatric psychologist who would coordinate their support groups and counseling referrals. "Before we begin," Eleanor said once everyone was settled, "I want to thank you all for believing in this vision. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined sitting here today. Sometimes the most meaningful journeys begin with a single, difficult step," Linda observed. "Or in your case, a slap." The women shared a knowing laugh. Each of them had heard Eleanor's story, and many had shared similar experiences of their own. The meeting proceeded efficiently, with updates on their website development, discussion of the first support group scheduled to begin the following week, and review of the emergency grant application process. As they were wrapping up, Deborah handed Eleanor a stack of envelopes. "These came to the P.O. box yesterday. Responses to the article in the Seacliff Gazette." A local reporter had featured Eleanor's story and the Foundation's mission in a human interest piece the previous week. The article, while respecting privacy by changing names, had detailed how a local woman in her 70s had stood up to family pressure and channeled the experience into creating resources for others. "I'll go through them this afternoon," Eleanor promised, back at her condominium. Eleanor settled on the balcony with a cup of tea and began reading the letters. The very first one caught her by surprise. "Dear Mrs. Thompson, I read about your experience in the Gazette, and though names were changed, I recognized aspects of my own life in your story. I'm 73 years old, and my son and daughter-in-law have been pressuring me to sell my farmhouse and move into a retirement community so they can invest the proceeds for me. When I refused, they began suggesting I might have early dementia. My doctor has found no such signs, but they continue to bring it up whenever I disagree with them. I felt so alone in this struggle. Reading about what you did, canceling the wedding, establishing boundaries, creating the foundation, gave me courage. I've made an appointment with an attorney to protect my assets and update my will. Thank you for showing me I'm not imagining things, and I'm not alone. Sincerely, Margaret Wilson." Eleanor read the letter twice, her hands trembling slightly. This was exactly why she had created the foundation, to reach women like Margaret who were facing similar pressures but lacked the resources or support to resist them. The next letter was from a woman whose daughter had borrowed $30,000 from her retirement account without permission, using a power of attorney that had been intended for medical emergencies. Another described a widower whose adult children had sold his belongings while he was recovering from surgery, claiming they were helping him downsize. By the time Eleanor finished reading the 12 letters, she felt both heartbroken at the prevalence of such stories and more convinced than ever of the Foundation's importance. These weren't isolated incidents. They represented a pattern of behavior that remained largely hidden, with older adults often too ashamed or isolated to seek help. That evening, Eleanor called Caroline to share what she had discovered. "We need to start a letter-writing campaign," Caroline suggested. "Get our story into more publications. Create a safe space for these women and men to share their experiences." "Exactly what I was thinking," Eleanor agreed. "And we need to compile these stories, anonymized, of course, as evidence for policymakers. There's a systemic problem here that goes beyond individual family conflicts. As she hung up, Eleanor noticed an email notification on her tablet. It was from Mark. Brief but significant, Mom. My therapist suggested I write down things I've taken for granted about you. The list was embarrassingly long. I never asked about your dreams, your friendships, your interests beyond being my mother. I'm sorry for that blindness. Rachel and I are continuing therapy, both individually and together. It's difficult but necessary. She's confronting her issues with financial insecurity and control. I'm working on setting boundaries and finding my voice. Would it be okay if I visited next weekend, just me, not Rachel? I'd like to hear more about the foundation. Love. Mark Eleanor felt a complex mixture of emotions, hope tempered with caution, love complicated by memory of hurt. She replied with a simple acceptance, then sat on her balcony watching the ocean until long after sunset, thinking about second chances and whether they were worth the risk. The following week brought more letters to the foundation, along with the launch of their first support group. 6 women attended, ranging in age from 62 to 84, each with her own story of family pressure, manipulation, or outright exploitation. I thought it was normal, said Ruth, a soft-spoken former librarian. My daughter always said, Mom, you don't need that big house. Or Mom, why are you saving that money? You should enjoy life. It took me years to realize she meant I should give everything to her. My son moved in temporarily after his divorce, added Joan, her voice tight with controlled anger. That was 4 years ago. He pays no rent, eats my food, uses my utilities, and tells everyone what a saint he is for taking care of Mom. Eleanor facilitated gently, drawing on her own experience but careful not to dominate the conversation. Linda, observing as the group's professional advisor, noted afterward how quickly the women bonded over their shared experiences. There's powerful healing in simply being heard and believed, she told Eleanor as they locked up the office. Many of these women have been gaslighted for years, told they're selfish or confused or difficult when they try to maintain boundaries. I know exactly how that feels, Eleanor replied, remembering Rachel's accusations of bitterness, of jealousy, of being selfish for not giving up her home. That Saturday, Mark arrived at Eleanor's condominium precisely at noon, carrying a small potted orchid. He looked different somehow, more centered, less frantic than during his previous visits. This is nice, he said, genuinely this time, as he took in the ocean view from her balcony. I can see why you chose it. They walked to a nearby cafe for lunch, their conversation tentative at first, gradually becoming more natural as they settled into neutral topics, the unusually warm autumn weather, the new coffee shop that had opened downtown, the farmer's market that Eleanor visited each Sunday morning. Over dessert, Mark finally broached the subject of the foundation. I read the article in the Gazette, he said, stirring his coffee. The foundation sounds impressive. It's small but growing, Eleanor replied. We've received over 30 letters in the past 2 weeks, and our first support group is at capacity. I had no idea so many older people faced these kinds of pressures, Mark admitted. I mean, I knew what we did wasn't right, but I thought it was an isolated incident, a mistake made in the heat of the moment. It's far more common than people realize, Eleanor explained. Many older adults, especially women, are conditioned to put everyone else's needs first. When they try to assert boundaries, they're often made to feel selfish or ungrateful. Mark nodded, looking uncomfortable. Like when I expected you to give us your house, and acted like you were being difficult for refusing. Exactly like that. He stared into his coffee. My therapist says I've never really seen you as a complete person with your own dreams and desires, that I've only seen you as an extension of myself, a resource. The admission hung between them, painful but honest. That's why I created the foundation, Eleanor said gently, not just to help others, but to reclaim my own identity, to be Eleanor, not just Mark's mom. I'm starting to understand that, Mark replied. And I want you to know, I'm working on the conditions in the will. The therapy is challenging, but helpful, and I'm preparing a public apology, though I wanted to discuss that with you first. An apology is meaningful only if it's sincere, Mark, not if it's done merely to secure an inheritance. I know. That's why I'm not rushing it. I want to truly understand what I did wrong and how I can make amends, not just check boxes. As they walked back to the condominium, Mark asked, "Have you heard from Rachel?" "No. Should I have?" "She's been talking about reaching out to you. She's been in intensive therapy, too. Her issues with financial insecurity run deep. Her family lost their home when she was 12, and they lived in their car for several months before her mother found a job in an apartment." Eleanor hadn't known this detail of Rachel's background. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped explain the desperation behind her demand for the house, the deep-seated fear of being without security, without walls to protect her. "If she wants to contact me, I'm open to hearing from her," Eleanor said carefully. "But I won't pretend the slate is clean. Mark, trust has to be rebuilt over time. I understand. We both do." After Mark left, Eleanor sat at her painting easel on the balcony, working on a seascape that had been challenging her for weeks. Something about the way the light hit the waves had eluded her previous attempts. But today, with the conversation with Mark still resonating, her brush seemed to find the right strokes naturally. Perhaps, she thought, this was what moving forward looked like. Not a dramatic reconciliation, not an immediate healing of all wounds, but small moments of increased understanding, tiny steps toward a new kind of relationship built on mutual respect rather than obligation or entitlement. The foundation, her painting, her new home, all were pieces of the woman Eleanor was becoming, a woman who had been hidden within Mark's mom for decades, waiting for the chance to emerge. The Dignity Foundation's profile grew steadily throughout the fall. A second article appeared in a statewide newspaper, followed by an interview on a local radio station. Eleanor, initially reluctant to be the public face of the organization, found herself becoming more comfortable sharing her story, understanding that her experience could serve as both warning and inspiration for others. "You have a natural way of connecting with people," Deborah observed after Eleanor spoke at a community center event. "You're authentic without being dramatic, firm without being bitter. People respond to that." The Foundation's work expanded beyond support groups to include a legal clinic staffed by volunteer attorneys one afternoon a week, financial literacy workshops, and a peer counseling program that paired women who had successfully established boundaries with those just beginning the process. Eleanor was reviewing grant applications one November afternoon when Linda called from the office. "Someone's here to see you," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Rachel Walker." Eleanor felt her chest tighten. "Did she say why?" "Just that she'd like to speak with you if you're willing. She seems nervous." After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor replied, "Tell her I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to the Foundation office gave Eleanor time to compose herself, to decide how she wanted to approach this unexpected encounter. She was neither looking for confrontation nor willing to pretend the past hadn't happened. What she wanted most was authenticity, whatever form that might take. Rachel was waiting in the small conference room, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee. She looked different from Eleanor's memory of the immaculate, controlled woman who had slapped her 6 months earlier. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup, her expression apprehensive rather than demanding. "Thank you for seeing me," Rachel said as Eleanor took the seat across from her. "Linda said you wanted to talk," Eleanor replied evenly. Rachel nodded, her eyes darting around the room before settling on Eleanor's face. "I've been trying to work up the courage to call you for weeks. Mark said you might be open to a conversation, but I wasn't sure." "I'm listening." Rachel took a deep breath. "I came to apologize. Not the kind of apology I tried to give the night of the rehearsal dinner. That wasn't real. It was just damage control." She paused. "I want to apologize sincerely for what I did to you." "Which part specifically?" Eleanor asked, not unkindly but firmly. "All of it," Rachel said, her voice steadier now. "For demanding your house. For seeing you as an obstacle rather than a person. For physically attacking you when you refused to give me what I wanted." and for the things I said afterward. Why did you do it? Rachel. The younger woman's composure faltered slightly. My therapist has helped me understand that I have issues with security. Financial security specifically. She stared down at her hands. When I was 12, my father lost his job and then gambled away our savings trying to recover. We lost our house. For almost 6 months. We lived in our car or with relatives who clearly resented us. Eleanor nodded, remembering what Mark had shared. I developed this obsession with having a secure home, Rachel continued. When I saw your house, paid off, in a good neighborhood, stable, I fixated on it. I convinced myself you didn't really need it, that you were being selfish for keeping it when we could use it to secure our future. That doesn't justify hitting me. Nothing justifies that, Rachel agreed immediately. That was pure rage that I couldn't control you, couldn't make you do what I wanted. It's the worst thing I've ever done, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. The sincerity in Rachel's voice was unmistakable. Whether it was enough to rebuild trust was another question entirely. I've been in intensive therapy, Rachel added. Twice a week, working specifically on my control issues and my approach to financial security. I'm learning healthier ways to manage my anxiety without trying to control others. And Mark, how is he doing? He's finding his voice, Rachel said with a small, sad smile. For the first time, he's really standing up to me, setting boundaries. It's painful sometimes, but necessary. We've postponed the wedding indefinitely until we're both healthier individually and as a couple. Eleanor was surprised by the honesty in this assessment. That sounds wise. I've also been reading about your foundation, Rachel continued. The work you're doing is important. I had no idea how common these family conflicts are. Neither did I, until I experienced it personally. Rachel hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. This isn't much, but I wanted to make a donation to the foundation. It's from my personal savings, not from Mark. Eleanor accepted the envelope, touched by the gesture but still cautious. Thank you. We can put it to good use. There's something else, Rachel said, her voice growing uncertain again. Mark mentioned the conditions in your will, about public apologies. Yes, I want to do that. Not for the inheritance, honestly. I don't care about that anymore. But because I think it might help other women who've been in your position to see accountability. Eleanor studied Rachel's face. Looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, she saw only nervous determination. What did you have in mind? I thought I might write something for the local paper about what I did, why it was wrong, and what I've learned. I wouldn't use your name without permission. Of course. It was more than Eleanor had expected. I'd like to see what you write before it's published. Of course. Rachel gathered her purse, preparing to leave. Thank you for seeing me today. I know you had every right to refuse. As they stood, Rachel added, The foundation? It's remarkable what you've created from something so painful. You've turned harm into help for others. After Rachel left, Eleanor remained in the conference room, processing the unexpected encounter. There had been no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embrace, but there had been something perhaps more valuable: honesty, accountability, and the first tentative steps toward genuine understanding. Linda poked her head in. Everything okay? I think so, Eleanor replied. It was surprising. Good surprising or bad surprising? Eleanor considered the question. Neither, just real. That evening, Eleanor painted later than usual, watching the sunset give way to twilight and then to the deep blue of night. She was working on a new series, abstract expressions of emotion rather than literal representations of landscapes. Tonight's canvas featured deep reds transitioning to purples and finally to a peaceful blue, anger giving way to reflection and then to acceptance. As she cleaned her brushes, Eleanor's phone chimed with a text from Mark. Rachel told me about your meeting. Thank you for giving her that chance. We're both trying to be better people, not for the inheritance, but because it's right. Eleanor smiled slightly as she replied, "I appreciate the effort you're both making. Real change takes time and consistency. I'm cautiously hopeful." Looking out at the night sky, Eleanor reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. From the shocking moment of Rachel's slap to the creation of the foundation, from the sale of her family home to the new life she was building, each step had been challenging, often painful, but ultimately transformative. She was no longer just Mark's mom or Richard's widow. She was Eleanor Thompson, artist, founder, advocate, friend. A whole person with dreams and boundaries and a voice that grew stronger every day. 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning, Eleanor stood at the podium in the community center's main hall, looking out at the crowd gathered for the Dignity Foundation's first annual conference. More than 100 women and a scattering of men filled the seats, some taking notes, others nodding in recognition as Eleanor described the foundation's mission and achievements. "In our first year," she said, "we've provided direct support to over 50 women facing family pressure or financial exploitation. We've established 3 weekly support groups, a legal clinic, and an emergency grant program that has helped 8 women secure independent housing away from controlling family members." From the front row, Deborah, Caroline, and the other board members smiled encouragingly. In the middle of the audience, Mark sat next to Rachel, both listening attentively. "But perhaps our greatest achievement," Eleanor continued, "has been creating a space where older adults, particularly women, can share their experiences without shame or doubt, where they are believed, supported, and empowered to set boundaries." After Eleanor's opening remarks, the conference broke into smaller workshop sessions. She found herself with a few minutes alone in the small office they were using as a preparation room. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "May we come in?" Mark asked, Rachel standing slightly behind him. "Of course." Eleanor gestured them inside. "The conference is amazing." "Mom," Mark said, "I had no idea the foundation had grown so much." "We've been fortunate to have strong community support," Eleanor replied. "And the need is certainly there." Rachel handed Eleanor a folder. "I wanted to give you this in person. It's the draft of my public statement that we discussed. The Gazette is willing to publish it as an op-ed next month if you approve." Eleanor opened the folder and scanned the first paragraph 6 months ago. "I physically assaulted my future mother-in-law when she refused to give me her house as a wedding gift. It was an act of entitlement, rage, and profound disrespect that I deeply regret. While I cannot undo that moment of violence, I can acknowledge it publicly, take full responsibility, and share what I've learned about the pressures many older adults face from family members who view their resources as communal property rather than their personal assets. This is very direct," Eleanor said, surprised by the unflinching honesty. "It needs to be," Rachel replied. "Glossing over what happened wouldn't help anyone," Mark added. "I've written one too, about standing by and doing nothing when someone I love was being mistreated, about the silence that enables abuse." Eleanor felt a tightness in her throat. "I'll read them both carefully. We've also completed the year of therapy," Mark said, "both individual and couples counseling. It's been difficult but transformative. We're different people now," Rachel added. "Or maybe we're becoming the people we should have been all along." Eleanor studied them both, her son who had once expected her to sacrifice her security for his comfort, and the woman who had once struck her in anger. They had changed, visibly and substantively. Whether that change was sufficient to fully rebuild trust remained to be seen, but it was undeniable progress. "I appreciate the work you've both done," Eleanor said sincerely. "It can't have been easy." "Nowhere near as hard as what you went through," Mark replied. "Building a new life, starting the foundation, helping others, all while processing what we did to you." After they left to attend the next workshop session, Eleanor took a moment to collect herself. The path of the past year had been unexpected in every way, from the catastrophic rupture of the canceled wedding to the flourishing of her new identity and purpose. The afternoon concluded with a panel discussion featuring several women who had received support from the foundation. Eleanor watched from the side of the stage as they shared their stories, not as victims, but as survivors who had reclaimed their autonomy. That evening, Eleanor hosted a small dinner at her condominium for the board members, with Mark and Rachel joining them for dessert. The atmosphere was relaxed, conversation flowing easily between work on the foundation, Caroline's upcoming art exhibition, and Linda's plans for expanding their support groups to neighboring communities. As everyone gathered on the balcony with coffee, watching the stars emerge above the ocean, Deborah raised her cup in a toast. "To Eleanor," she said warmly, who turned a moment of crisis into a movement of compassion. "And to new beginnings," Caroline added. At any age, later, after everyone had left, Eleanor remained on the balcony alone, savoring the night breeze and the distant sound of waves. Mark and Rachel had been the last to leave, lingering to help with dishes and to share news of their tentative wedding plans, a small ceremony the following year, modest and intimate, with no extravagant displays. "We're paying for everything ourselves," Mark had explained. "No borrowed money, no pressure on family, and no expectations of houses as wedding gifts," Rachel had added with a self-deprecating smile that acknowledged the gravity of her past behavior without making light of it. Now, in the quiet of the evening, Eleanor reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. The slap that had seemed so devastating had ultimately liberated her, forcing her to confront patterns of relationship that had limited her for decades. By selling the house that had anchored her to the past, she had freed herself to create a future of her own design. By establishing boundaries with Mark and Rachel, she had paradoxically opened the possibility of a healthier relationship with both of them. By founding the Dignity Foundation, she had transformed personal pain into collective healing. On her easel, a new painting was taking shape, not the seascapes or abstract emotions she had been focusing on, but a portrait, her own face, rendered with the unflinching honesty of self-knowledge, eyes direct and clear, mouth curved in the slight smile of a woman who had discovered, at 70, that life could begin again. Eleanor Thompson, no longer defined by loss or limitation, no longer living in the shadow of others' expectations. A woman who had found, in the autumn of her life, a new and unexpected spring. The final house had never been about walls and windows, deeds and dollars. It had been about claiming the final authority over her own life and helping others do the same. Eleanor picked up her brush and added one last touch to the portrait, a subtle light in the eyes that spoke of possibility, of journeys yet to come, of a woman who had learned that endings were often just disguised beginnings. Outside, the ocean continued its eternal rhythm, the stars wheeled overhead, and Eleanor painted long into the night, finally and completely at home in herself. The end.